Aliens Bishop is the new novel released this month. I've been discussing it on the channel lately, and it's great to see Bishop back in a new story. But this wouldn't be the first time in the Aliens Expanded Universe that Bishop was the subject of focus in an original story. Aliens Bug Hunt, the short story collection, featured a prequel to Aliens titled Broken. This was written by author Rachel Kane, where we saw Bishop first brought online and introduced to life in the Colonial Marines. As Broken begins, Bishop is activated and greeted by one of his technicians, a Dr. Sasaki. From the story. He knew he was not human. That knowledge had been hard-coded into him, along with a variety of terms for what he was. Android, synthetic, robot, artificial person. He decided he was an artificial person, and as he did, he smiled, focused on the person standing across from him, and said, "Hello." The person ignored him to tap on a data tablet. She was loud, he realized, and dialed his inputs back to acceptable levels, where the pulsing roar of her heartbeat and rush of blood and gurgle of nutrient processing and creaking bellows of her lungs no longer distracted him. Now he only heard the tap of her fingers on the pad, the hum of the electronics all around him, the whisper of the air recycling system. A great deal of inputs, but his brain flawlessly processed, identified, and stored each one. Designation HS1 7B48XG5-D5. Your name is now Bishop. Do you acknowledge? Her voice was a complex marvel of harmonics, one he stored to examine later, but she had asked him a question, and he immediately answered. Acknowledged, Dr. Sasaki. I'm pleased to meet you. I didn't tell you my name. I'm sorry, Dr. Sasaki. I read your name tag. I hope that's all right. He smiled again. This seemed to be the right expression for the occasion, and he chose one that the database identified as wistful. Have I done something wrong? She seemed to debate that for a very long time, with her finger hovering over her datapad, and then shook her head. No, Bishop, you haven't. Please join the others. Bishop turned while processing all that to look where she indicated. There was a doorway behind him, and beyond it, another room. Instead of moving toward it, he looked down, because he detected that the area on which he stood resonated at a different frequency. It was a round section that was hollow beneath, and bisected in the middle. What is that, Dr. Sasaki? He asked, and then immediately clarified because he had been imprecise. What am I standing on? You're a curious one, she said, and there was a change in her voice now, another resonant shift he'd have to save for examination later. That's a failsafe. There is a very small chance that upon activation, a synthetic such as yourself may exhibit signs of instability. I see, Bishop said, still staring down. It opens. Where does it go? The chute leads to a machine that disassembles defective units to constituent parts for reuse. He was standing over an execution chamber. Bishop stepped off the circle. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was one his volume processor, his brain, had simply ordered in the interest of self-preservation. The artificial organ that regulated the flow of hydraulic fluid through his trunk, head, and limbs had increased its rate of flow. He didn't want to die. Thank you, Dr. Sasaki, he said, because he had been programmed to be polite, and walked into the next room. Behind him, he heard Dr. Sasaki give a deep, trembling sigh and whisper something in a language he identified as Japanese. I should have flushed him. Another flicker of emotion raced through him, this one subtly different, a new one. Sadness. There were 4 other artificial persons seated in the next room. All of them looked identical to him, in form and coloring, except that they were dressed in gray clothing with the Weyland-Yutani corporate logo on the collars, and he had nothing except his synthetic skin. Hello, he said. My name is Bishop. All 4 stood up, flawlessly synchronized. He heard the pitch of data exchange, inaudible to human hearing, as they coordinated actions, and then one said, I am Rook. The others were named Castle, King, and Knight. Someone likes chess, Bishop said, and smiled because he felt a pulse of what he identified as amusement. It was followed by disquiet when none of the rest smiled back. They simply stared, clinically analyzing him, cataloging, dissecting. Our names are based on chess terms, Knight replied. It was Bishop's voice, but the inflections were flat, uninspired, lifeless. I'm not sure why that implies someone likes chess. Then I can't help you, Bishop said. He took in more data. The room was white, like the last, only there were no failsafes in the floor, and there were no two stiff white couches that could seat 3 each. A low table in the middle, also white, he realized, finding the decorating uninspired, held a neatly folded cloth jumpsuit, just like the ones his brothers, could he call them brothers, also wore. He took it and pulled it on over his synthetic epidermis with quick, efficient motions, pulled the zipper shut, and said, "What do we do now?" The others sat down on the couches, perfectly synchronized. He heard the dataset sync calling him to join them, but instead Bishop continued to stand and folded his arms. Identical sets of eyes stared at him, medium brown, not as dark as Dr. Sasaki's, and he studied the identical worn features of their faces. Pale skin, high arching forehead with a shock of brown hair, deep-set lines bracketing nose and mouth. Looking at the other 4 seemed like looking at strangers, not a mirror. The others turned their heads in unison toward the closed door at the far end. He heard the activation code being entered too, but waited until the portal slid open before he shifted his gaze to it. A young, bulky man, a real person, bored and annoyed, leaned in and said, "Move out. You're being shipped." "Shipped where?" Bishop asked. The man seemed startled, and then he frowned. "My responses are outside the normal parameters," he thought, "but not so far outside that I was sent to my death down the chute. What did that make him? Defective? Strange? Different," he thought. "I'm different." He waited for emotion to come, and it did, a bright flash he identified as satisfaction. "Shut up and walk," the man said, and Bishop did. But where the other 4 walked in precise rhythm, he made sure his steps were a bit longer, a bit out of sync. Different. These were the first moments of Bishop's life, according to Kane's story, and he is soon shipped out for his first mission. He joins a colonial marine unit dispatched to the Haarsa colony, an intended showplace for the terraforming division of Weyland-Yutani. Haarsa was populated by 47 colonists in total, but by Bishop's calculations upon arrival, half of those were already dead. The colony had been occupied by a terrorist group known as Company F. Company F recruited former colonial marines, mercenaries, and anyone who met their standards of moral absence and greed. Their methodology was, Bishop thought, objectively brilliant. They landed on an otherwise hard-working, peaceful settlement, took hostages, killed as many as it took to get their point across, and made a financial demand to the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, or whichever rival company owned the terraformed colony. It was a quick payoff, and the pirates moved on to pillage another day. Bishop, now with the Marine Dispatchment led by Lieutenant Lou Lucky Larson, found himself in the midst of a firefight with Company F and the remaining hostages. By Bishop's count, there were about 30 members of Company F, holding 11 hostages, including 4 children. Larson orders Bishop to check the wounded and tag those worth being evacuated, reminding the synthetic that there are only 12 extra cryochambers. This was not exactly a rescue mission in the traditional sense. The official orders were to blow the colony's central converters and evacuate. Larson explained this objective to Bishop and was met with some objection. He points out that if the central converters are destroyed, the complex will be flooded with Prevox. Prevox was a vital component in the terraforming process, but a volatile and dangerous gas. The story goes on to explain Bishop's quandary with this aspect of the mission and his eventual workaround. Bishop weighed the odds of persuading Larson to go against orders and decided that they weren't good. Larson wasn't afraid to kill, and he wasn't afraid of civilian casualties. He had a pragmatic outlook to war, and as far as he was concerned, Haarsa colony had just become a war zone. Innocents were bound to die, and his job was to make sure his soldiers survived. So Bishop walked out into the open atrium and methodically checked each of the fallen. 7 dead, 2 so gravely wounded that even cryosleep and the best medical attention wasn't going to save them. That left 10 for the cryochambers, and Bishop used comms to call for transport. Larson left him to it and followed a map to the central control room. Bishop calmly reassured the wounded, those who could hear him, that they would be evacuated and treated, and they were in no danger. He tried not to listen to the cries of the ones he'd red-tagged as too far gone. He wasn't wrong about their chances at life. It wasn't a judgment call. They were dying, and nothing could stop it. So when 2 company medics, Patel and Luo, arrived and began loading the yellow tags on stretchers, it was odd that he felt it necessary to go to talk to those who were being left behind, to tell them that everything was all right. He didn't tell them they were dying. 4 of them died while he was with them. 1 ceased functioning before he could get to him. The others weren't conscious. When he looked up, he was the only one standing, and the atrium seemed utterly still now, with only the rush of wind through the broken skylight. The dead were as silent as the broken, bullet-marked concrete. "Bishop." He looked up. Larson was leaning over the balcony, staring down. "Everybody out?" "Yes, Lieutenant." "Then what the fuck are you doing? Get to the ship. We have less than 5 minutes before the converters blow." Bishop considered that. The calculations took nanoseconds, but he already knew before the results came in what he was going to do. Maybe he was, after all, defective. A true artificial person didn't make a decision in advance of data calculations. "I can take a supply of functioning masks with me, enough for the hostages. I can get to them in time." "No. I don't need to breathe." "Bishop, I said no. You're an asset, and I'm not leaving you to get reprogrammed by Company F or shot full of holes. You know how much you cost?" Bishop blinked, not because he needed the lubrication, but because he had to reorganize his information. "Lieutenant Larson doesn't see me as part of his team. I'm an asset, a machine, an expensive machine that he'll get in trouble for losing." It was the same cold math that WEYLAND-YUTANI used to decide that they could afford to lose Haarsa Colony and every human being inside it to stop Company F and make it clear they weren't paying ransoms any longer. They were sending the message in blood, and Lieutenant Larson was willing to write it for them, but not in synthetic blood. Bishop, an artificial person, turned away and walked out of the atrium, down a sloping corridor, and let Larson's shouts echo behind him. He knew Larson wouldn't come after. For all the shouts, Larson wasn't stupid. He wouldn't risk his life for this. If Bishop succeeded, he'd take credit. If Bishop failed, he'd blame the pirates. He heard Larson's footsteps running for the exit as he reached the first emergency life cabinet and tore it open. The neatly ranked life support masks all showed red indicators, which meant they were indeed disabled, but Bishop took them one at a time, cracked the processor casing, snapped the tiny filament that locked out changes, and used his onboard data sync to flash program them again. There were 11 hostages. He took 11 masks, stuffed them into an expandable bag from his pack, and broke into a deeper run into the bowels of Haarsa Colony. The secure area door he found was too thick to batter down, but he ran a password breaker, intended only for official use, on the keyboard and had it open in 15 seconds. The timer he ran as a faint display on his left eye showed him that he had less than 2 minutes left before the converters blew out. It would take time for the gas to reach toxic levels, but Prevox bound to oxygen, which meant everyone breathing would suffocate well before the toxins killed them. The children would die faster. He tried to calculate how much faster, but without more information it was imprecise, and he erased the calculations and ran faster, stretching lab-grown tendons and pumping hydraulics at a red-line rate. It was good he was moving so fast because the first bullets missed him by quite a large margin, and he shifted course and dove behind the cover of a corner as another weapon roared. Concrete chipped and flew in knife-edge shards. He felt a cut and looked down to see that his synthetic epidermis was sliced across the top of his hand, leaking a thin stream of thick white fluid. It reveled in a marvel of strong, pale synth-engineered tendons, pistons, data channels, glistening, hair-thin wires. If he'd had time, he'd have been fascinated. Instead, he opened a kit at his belt, took out a small can, and sprayed skin over the gap. It had an ugly look, but he'd fix it later. If there was a later. "Hey, Marine," someone yelled around the corner. "How does it feel to be another gun for hire for the suits? You take an oath to the corporations now?" Bishop didn't answer because he was distracted. Not by his wound, but by something else. A sensation, like a tapping on his brain. He'd felt it before, but not for years. Not since the day he was born. "He's not a Colonial Marine," said a very familiar voice. His own voice. "He's a synthetic, like me." The sensation he was feeling was a sync link trying to connect. They were programmed that way, to share data across models. He rejected the sync and said, in a calm tone that was somehow entirely different from his brother's, "Not like you, Rook." "His name is Bishop," Rook said to the others on the side of the corner. "He isn't a threat. We are not programmed to fight. He won't even have a weapon." That much was true. Bishop didn't like guns. He'd never really thought of that as programming, but it probably was. Still, he wasn't Rook. "We can always use another synth," the other voice said. the one that wasn't a mirror image of his own. "Come on out, Bishop. We won't shoot. Consider yourself a new member of Company F." "It's not that easy," Rook said. He still had the same strange cadence, the same monotone delivery that Bishop remembered. Just enough wrong to make Bishop think, but am I really right? "He's been reprogrammed for loyalty to the core. You'll need to reprogram him." "Like they did you?" Bishop asked. That got a general wave of cold laughter. "Nah, we didn't have to push a button. This is Key Parker, by the way, leader of Company F. Old Rook, he was ours to begin with. Got shot up on a mission. They scrapped him. We salvaged him. You're with Lucky Larson, right? Damn, small universe. I was there when he got his face sliced open. Ugly enough to make me want to puke. Company F's just like the Marines, only we pay more. What do you say, Bishop? You in?" "Sure," Bishop said. "As long as you release the hostages. You have..." He flipped the timer back to visible. 17 seconds. There was a murmur among the soldiers, and a woman said, "The fuck?" While someone else said, "Fucking synths, we should just take them for parts." And a hostage began to cry. 16. 15. 14. At 10, Bishop calmly called the time again and said, "What does Company F stand for?" "Company F for fuck you, and also fuck your countdown, synth. Step out and we won't shoot. Stay here and we'll cut you to pieces." That wasn't the plan, which Bishop knew because, sync-link or not, he was somehow aware of Rook moving. Rook was circling around to come in behind him, most likely to take him prisoner, but possibly to shoot him in the back. Bishop turned, ran in the direction Rook would be coming, and timed it to turn the corner just as his brother, his mirror image, reached it. Face to face, again. Except they weren't mirrors anymore, if they had ever been. Rook looked expressionless, plastic, lifeless though he moved like a person. Bishop was undecided on the human concept of souls, but a look into Rook's empty eyes was enough to show that his brother definitely didn't possess one. Rook didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, and there was a knife in his hand, a black combat model with a 6-inch blade. Bishop met him halfway, twisting that hand enough that the stab missed him. Then he slammed the heel of his palm into the spots where he knew Rook was vulnerable. He'd have taken the time to learn his own vulnerabilities, and in 3 seconds, Rook was down, the knife skittering away from his open hand. Bishop knelt on his spine, picked up the knife, and said, "I'm sorry," before he plunged the knife down into just the right spot to sever the nexus that fed instructions from the brain to the limbs. Rook wasn't dead, he just couldn't move. Eventually, he'd power down, and finally, in several human lifetimes, he'd go completely dark. Bishop stood, flipped the knife expertly end over end, and caught it by the blade before slipping it into his belt. "Just because you're not programmed for something doesn't mean you can't learn it," he told Rook, though Rook was long past learning anything. The head was turned sideways, and one eye stared up at him. The mouth opened and closed, but nothing except a gout of white hydraulic fluid came out. Bishop watched the timer, and when it reached 0, he crouched against the wall. He'd calculated this part too. This wall was mathematically the least likely to be damaged by the blast. Boom. That was how they wrote the sound in books he'd read, but it wasn't a boom, really. It was a roar. A deep and shuddering thunder that rattled the entire complex, shattered structural bones, and tore through his body like a solid blow. Bishop thought of the ruined beauty of the marketplace. It'd be gone by now, and those he'd red-tagged and the witness dying would be buried in ruins. The blast had hit the opposite corner hard. Bishop restarted the counter. He had less than a minute to get these masks on the hostages, if they'd survived. He ran in that direction and came to a fast, skidding stop when he saw most of Company F was lying dead, crushed and broken and bleeding. But there were 4 or 5 still standing, and they were all aiming weapons at him. "It's Rook," he said, and kept his voice the mirror of his crippled brother's. Flat, unfeeling, and above all calm. He drew the knife from his belt and showed it to them, then put it on the ground. "Bishop's dead." One of the soldiers spat out blood and lowered his gun. Once he had, all the rest did too. "What's in the bag?" "More explosives," Bishop said. The idea was to keep them talking. One of the fallen Company F crew screamed from somewhere under a pile of rubble, and Bishop looked at it, then back at the leader, Key Parker. Do you want me to dig them out? No. I want you to take that bag of boom up top, tell them you're Bishop, get on board, and blow those bastards all to hell. We owe them that. That's an order, Rook. Take 'em out. The timer said 20 seconds had elapsed since the explosion. Particulates were rising. He set his internal sensors to alert him when they had reached significant enough levels to affect Parker. Of course, he said, with the same flat delivery. Anything else? Anything else? What the hell else could there be? Go! Bishop angled his head up and said, The roof is unstable. You should move. Fuck. Parker looked around. Most of the hostages had survived. 3 of the children and 5 adults. 3 lay buried somewhere in the rubble with his other soldiers. Get them up. All right, let's go. After you. Bishop set a slow pace as the seconds ticked by. The alert flashed red in the corner of his vision, and he banished it with a blink as he turned to look behind him. Parker and his remaining 3 soldiers were still on their feet, but they looked unsteady. Of the hostages, 2 of the children had fallen, and had been picked up by adults. The third, older, swayed and clutched at the woman next to her. They were all gasping. Prevox! Parker managed to gasp. He lunged past Rook to one of the life cabinets. He unlocked it with a flash of fingers on the pad, grabbed a mask, and put it over his face. Bishop saw him take in a breath, and then another, and another. Parker turned toward the synth he still thought was Rook. Bishop would never forget that look, that desperate, angry, terror-filled look. Not that he ever forgot anything, but Parker's expression seemed different. It seemed important. I'm not Rook, and they're not working, Bishop told him. He eased into a sitting position. Parker managed to fumble off the mask. He was trying to breathe. He was breathing, but it didn't do any good. His skin had gone gray. I have to save the ones I have for hostages. I'll help you too, just last. Bishop took Parker's gun away and put it aside. The other Company F survivors had already fallen, so had all of the hostages. Bishop methodically took the weapons, then fitted the working masks on each of the hostages, starting with the smallest. There were extras, since some of those he had intended to save were already dead. When he got back around to Parker, it was too late. Too late for his soldiers as well. I can't harm a human being, Bishop thought. But he hadn't. He'd simply prioritized helping in a logical way. It wasn't his fault that had resulted in someone's death. But, he thought, better the pirates than the prisoners. He wasn't altogether sure he should be making those kinds of judgments. He didn't know who to ask what was right and wrong in this case. He picked up 2 of the children, 1 in each arm, and set off at a run for the surface. They'd left a dropship for him, but the Marines were gone, and for good reason. The ground itself was unstable. Bishop's monitors reported multiple system failures due to the explosion in the converters. It was only a matter of time before the entire thing went up in a fireball. If the reactor didn't blow, then the oxygen supplies would as soon as the still raging fire reached them. Bishop made 3 trips, carrying 2 at once, and as he came back for the last 2 mass survivors, he found them dead. Also, he found them without masks, their faces gray and still, mouths open and eyes shining silver from Prevox poisoning. He was still trying to understand what had happened when he was shot in the back. Bishop didn't know what pain felt like to a real person, but to him it felt like a burning sensation that cut through him like a hot blade from back to front. Through skill, planning, or blind luck, the bullet tumbled through a nexus cluster, and he felt his right side go limp and dead, and he crumpled to the ground and rolled onto his back. 2 of the Company F soldiers stood over him, guns aimed down at his chest. They were wearing masks, the masks he'd put on the hostages. That was a surprise. His face registered an emotion, but he wasn't sure how that looked. A tragedy comedy mask, split like Lieutenant Larson's down the middle. The pain hadn't stopped, his synthetic brain reported. Dying is painful. That was an interesting fact. He wondered if he was afraid. His hydraulic system was redlining, as it had when he was running at top speed, though he could hardly move at all. His tongue felt dry. He felt a cold trickle of fluid underneath his body. Bleeding. Leaking. Is there a difference? Fucking synth, one of them said from under her mask, and kicked him very hard, but on the side he couldn't feel. Surprised? We had an air pocket under the rubble that saved us. Then we found these. She tapped the mask she wore. Thanks for that. Thanks for nothing, you freak, the other one, a man, said. They both aimed their weapons. At this range, those would shred him apart. Bishop tried to speak. With half of his mouth working, he wasn't sure it was very successful. Sorry, he told them, which was an odd thing to say, and he was sure he was malfunctioning, because he recognized the feeling that swept over him. It was hot and uncontrollable and almost human in its intensity, and all he knew in that moment was, if they leave here, they'll slaughter the hostages. And it was a moral dilemma that he was not programmed to handle, until he programmed himself. He opened his sync link to the masks and turned them off. He saw at the exact moment that they realized they couldn't breathe, that they'd taken in lethal gulps of Prevox-laden air. He expected them to shoot, but instead they dropped their weapons and grabbed for the masks, slapping them as if that would make them work. Then wrenching them off to try to gasp clean air that didn't exist. And then he closed his eyes and didn't watch the rest. There was a new feeling. Guilt. For his last action, Bishop synced to the dropship, put it on autopilot, and ordered it to dust off with the survivors he'd loaded inside. He kept tracing it until it was too far up for the sync to work, and then he had to believe that it would reach the ship, that Lieutenant Larson would understand that he had done his job for the Marines. I didn't kill anyone. I prioritized, and I protected. That was important. If he ever told anyone what he'd done, they'd flush him, execute him. But then again, he was going to die here well before that. There was nothing else to be accomplished. Bishop went to power save mode. He slept. As the story concludes, Bishop, of course, awakes and finds resolution. He comes to terms with programming, or a thought process that's just a little off-kilter, a little broken, as the title suggests. And it leads closer to the world and events of Aliens by finding Bishop in a new environment, surrounded by faces unfamiliar to him at first, but plenty familiar to us. When he booted awake again, he was in a med bay, and someone had their fingers in his back, probing, moving aside hydraulic tubes and connecting hair-thin wires with sharp little snaps of feeling, and suddenly, Bishop was online. Fully online. Healed. Yeah, that's got it, said a new voice. A strange voice, and the intrusive fingers left his body and smooth skin back in place. He felt the cut being sealed, and rolled over to sit up. The Marine who'd repaired him took a wide step back, holding out both hands. Whoa, peace. I'm friendly, man. So am I, Bishop said. Hello. Where's Lieutenant Larson? Reassigned, said a big man with a wide grin and an unlit cigar in his mouth. Said for us to check, said there was a synth on Haarsa that might still be salvageable, and since we lost ours a couple trips back... He had a sharp look in his eyes, Bishop thought. You're not one of those A2 models, right? No, Bishop said. I'm 3 generations later, D4. My designation is HS1 7B48XG5-D5. And what do they call you when you're home? Bishop, he said, and smiled. My name is Bishop. I like it. Suits you, Synth. I prefer the term artificial person, sir. Apone. Sergeant. Don't call me sir, I'm not a damn officer. Just Sergeant, or Apone, or both. You got me, Bishop? Yes, Sergeant. Good. Sergeant Apone held out his hand. Bishop stared at it for several seconds, then reached out and offered his own. He was careful not to crush the man's hand when they shook. Welcome to the team, Bishop. This fool's Private Hudson. Aw, Sarge, I didn't know you cared. Shut up, Hudson. Hudson gave Bishop a wide grin, all teeth. He says shut up, but I hear keep talking. He offered his hand for a shaking too. Odd. In all of his life, Bishop had never been treated like an equal. Not like that. Now, twice. You ever played Five-Finger Fillet? Bishop shook his head. Apone rolled his eyes, chomped a cigar, and said, You break 'em, you buy 'em, Hudson. He crossed his arms and leaned against the wall to watch, though, not interfering. Hudson pulled out a knife. You're gonna love this game. And he was right. I think I'm broken, Bishop thought, as he slammed the knife faster and faster between his spread fingers to Hudson's crows of delight. For no reason, he remembered Dr. Sazaki's finger hovering over a data tablet, ready to send him to recycle, and his hand blurred even faster, until even his eyes could barely track it. Maybe I've always been broken. That was all right. It made him happy. Whenever anything in relation to the short story collection Bug Hunt is explored here, it should be noted that the events portrayed throughout aren't necessarily meant to be taken as canon. The collection of stories, which deal with an array of backstories and peripheral elements to Alien's characters, was intended more as a what-if taking place in this universe. Broken, I think, is a comparatively innocuous story to some of the others and doesn't make any severe contradictions to the Bishop character. But it does suggest something special about him, and I think that's fair enough because I feel there is something special about him, and a lot of other fans do. Though what makes him special isn't necessarily something you can exactly put your finger on. I think this story makes a good introduction to the character and provides a good scenario in which to express that. Though a model like any other models of artificial persons, it's this specific Bishop that we tend to gravitate to. So I think it's appropriate enough that he's now the subject of his own full-length novel, one I enjoyed very much, and over the last few weeks have been hearing some positive responses to. Have you had the chance to read Alien's Bishop? What are your thoughts on how they continued this character's story? Do you think Broken makes for a good prequel story? Leave a comment below and let me know. As always, I'd like to thank you very much for watching today. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to leave it a like, and be sure to subscribe to keep up with the latest Alien Theory videos. My very special thanks goes out to Brandon James, XenoShadowMorph, and XenoZip, Queen Tiers of the Patreon Hive. Thank you to Gregory Ford and John Griggs, the Hive's Praetorians. A very special thanks to Lady Anne in the Ellen Ripley Tier of Excellence. And thank you so much to Nicholas Butta and Frank, the Alien Theory Weyland-Yutani executives. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page for further information. In the meantime, you can follow me on social media. Follow @alien_theory on TikTok for some fun video extras, and follow @AlienTheoryYT on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.